The chandeliers of Magnolia's cast amber light across tables where Charleston's elite discussed million-dollar deals over she-crab soup and shrimp and grits. Sarah Christine Wells moved through the dining room like a ghost, seen but not noticed, present but invisible. That was until the evening Margaret Rose Prescott sat at table 7 signing frantically to get her attention, and Sarah's carefully constructed anonymity shattered with 4 simple gestures. The elderly woman's face transformed with joy when Sarah's hands responded in American Sign Language. Behind her, a man in a $5,000 suit looked up from his phone. Steel gray eyes met Sarah's for the first time. Jonathan Michael Prescott had just noticed the woman who would save his life, but that moment of kindness 6 months ago would cost Sarah everything she'd rebuilt from nothing. Tonight she would face the man who'd stolen her past. And tomorrow she'd discover whether truth could ever triumph over power. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Charleston, South Carolina wore its history like fine jewelry, elegant, expensive, and impossible to ignore. The historic district's cobblestone streets led to Magnolia's, where old money dined on low country cuisine and discussed matters that shaped the city's future. Here, beneath crystal chandeliers and oil paintings of Confederate generals, the Prescott family had held court for 4 generations. Sarah Christine Wells knew every table, every regular, every whispered conversation that happened in the shadows of this gilded world. At 28, she moved through it like smoke, present but unseen, necessary but invisible. Her black uniform was worn thin at the elbows, carefully mended each Sunday night. Her shoes, resoled twice, clicked softly against marble floors as she refilled water glasses and cleared plates without disturbing the important people who never looked at her face. 6 months ago, she'd been someone else entirely. Dr. Sarah Wells, MBA from the University of South Carolina, financial analyst with a corner office and a future bright enough to blind. She'd spoken 4 languages, developed trading algorithms that Fortune 500 companies wanted to license, and wore suits that cost more than she now made in a month. That woman was dead, killed by trust and a man who'd promised forever. Now she lived in a studio apartment in West Ashley, where the rent was cheap and the neighbors didn't ask questions. 3 nights a week, she took the bus across town to visit her mother in the nursing home on Rivers Avenue. Margaret Wells no longer recognized her daughter's face. Alzheimer's had stolen that mercy along with everything else. But Sarah went anyway, reading her father's old letters aloud to a woman who thought she was the nurse, her father. Thomas Wells had taught high school mathematics for 37 years, died of cancer 3 years ago, never knowing his daughter would end up serving tables to Charleston's elite. He'd believed in her brilliance, sacrificed everything for her education, told her that intelligence and integrity would open every door. He'd been wrong. But he'd also taught her American Sign Language, insisting that communication was the highest form of respect. Their neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had been deaf, and Thomas Wells had learned to sign so she wouldn't feel alone. Sarah had followed his example, practicing until her hands could speak as fluently as her voice. It was this forgotten skill, this small inheritance from her father's kindness, that would change everything. Jonathan. Michael Prescott sat across from his mother in the back corner of Magnolia's, only half listening as she tried to order dinner. The Tuesday evening rush at Magnolia's had settled into its familiar rhythm when Margaret Rose Prescott arrived at table 7 with her son. Sarah noticed them immediately, not because of the expensive clothes or the way the hostess fawned over them, but because of the older woman's hands. Margaret was signing, rapid, frustrated gestures that her waiter clearly didn't understand. Sarah watched from across the dining room as the young server, Todd, new, still learning, tried to take Margaret's order. He smiled nervously, nodded without comprehension, then looked desperately toward the kitchen. Margaret's face held the resigned patience of someone accustomed to not being heard. Her son sat across from her, phone pressed to his ear, steel-gray eyes focused on whatever crisis demanded his attention. He gestured vaguely for his mother to handle the ordering herself, clearly unaware that she couldn't make the waiter understand. Sarah hesitated. Table 7 wasn't her section. Getting involved meant drawing attention, and she'd spent 6 months perfecting the art of being invisible. But her father's voice echoed in her memory. Always help when you can, Sarah. Kindness costs nothing and means everything. She set down her tray and crossed the dining room. "Excuse me," Sarah said softly to Todd. "May I help?" The relief on his face was immediate. "She keeps making hand gestures, and I don't—" "It's American Sign Language," Sarah said gently. "I can translate, if that's all right with everyone." Margaret's eyes widened with surprise and hope. Sarah turned to her and signed, "Good evening, ma'am. I apologize for the confusion. How may I help you?" The transformation on Margaret's face was instantaneous. Joy flooded her features as her hands flew in response. "You understand me. Oh, how wonderful. I was hoping to ask about the salmon. Does the chef use dill in the preparation?" "My late husband was allergic, and I still can't bear the taste." Sarah smiled and signed back. "Let me ask the chef for you. Would you prefer it with lemon and butter instead?" "That would be perfect. You're very kind." "It's my pleasure, ma'am." The conversation continued, Sarah's hands moving with practiced fluidity as she discussed menu options, wine pairings, and the evening's specials. Margaret was animated now, laughing, asking questions about Sarah's life with the genuine interest of someone starved for real conversation. Sarah was so focused on Margaret that she didn't notice when the man across the table ended his phone call, didn't see the exact moment his attention shifted from his screen to her face, didn't catch the way his expression changed from distraction to something that might have been wonder. Jonathan Michael Prescott had spent 5 years moving through life like a man underwater, present but not participating, breathing but not living. His wife Catherine's death had hollowed him out, left him with nothing but work and obligation and the daily performance of being the Prescott heir. He'd forgotten what it felt like to be surprised by anything. But watching this waitress, this stranger with tired eyes and worn shoes, spend 10 minutes in genuine conversation with his mother, asking nothing in return, expecting no recognition or reward, something shifted in his chest. Something that had been frozen for half a decade began tentatively to thaw. When Sarah finally stepped back, both hands full of notes about Margaret's preferences, the older woman caught her wrist gently. "What's your name?" Margaret signed. "Sarah Wells, ma'am." "You've made my evening, Sarah Wells. More than you know." Sarah felt heat creep up her neck. "I'm glad I could help. I'll get your order to the kitchen right away." She turned to leave, but Jonathan's voice stopped her. "Wait." It was the first word he'd spoken since they'd arrived. His voice was deeper than she'd expected, with the molasses-slow cadence of old Charleston money. Sarah turned back, suddenly aware that other diners were watching, that she'd broken protocol by inserting herself into another servers section, that her manager would have questions. "Yes, sir?" Jonathan studied her face with an intensity that made her want to step backward. "Where did you learn to sign?" "A neighbor when I was young, sir. She taught me that hands can speak what mouths can't." Margaret signed something to her son. He watched the movements with obvious comprehension, even if he couldn't sign back fluently. "My mother says you have a gift," Jonathan translated. "She wants to know if you'll be working next Tuesday." Sarah's throat tightened. This was how it always started, wealthy people noticing the help, thinking kindness meant availability for their convenience. She'd learned to set boundaries, to keep the walls high. "I work Tuesday evenings, yes, sir." "Then we'll request your section." It wasn't a question. Sarah nodded, uncomfortable with the attention, and escaped to the kitchen. Behind her, Margaret and Jonathan resumed their dinner, but the older woman's hands moved animatedly, and for the first time in months, Jonathan found himself actually listening. When they left 2 hours later, Sarah found $300 tucked under Jonathan's coffee cup with a note in his precise handwriting, "Thank you for seeing my mother, J.P." She stared at the money, more than she made in 2 nights, and felt the familiar war between pride and necessity. Pride lost. Her mother's nursing home bill was due Friday. Sarah pocketed the cash and tried to ignore the flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the way Jonathan Prescott had looked at her, like she was visible, like she mattered. It was dangerous, that look. She knew better than to trust it. But somewhere deep in her carefully guarded heart, a door she'd thought locked forever had cracked open, just an inch. They returned the following Tuesday. Sarah saw them the moment they entered. Margaret in pearls and a navy dress that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. Jonathan in charcoal gray that made his eyes look like storm clouds. The hostess led them directly to table 7, and Sarah felt her pulse quicken despite her best efforts at indifference. "Your regulars are back," her co-worker Lisa whispered, nudging Sarah's elbow. "The hot one keeps looking around. Probably for you." "Don't be ridiculous." But when Sarah approached with water glasses, Jonathan's face shifted into something that might have been relief. Margaret's hands flew immediately into animated greeting. "Sarah, I told Jonathan we had to come back. I've been thinking about our conversation all week." Sarah couldn't help but smile as she signed back. "It's wonderful to see you again, Mrs. Prescott. Should I tell the chef to prepare your salmon the same way? Please, and call me Margaret." "We're friends now. Friends." The word settled uncomfortably in Sarah's chest. She'd learned the hard way that friendship with people like this always had conditions attached, always ended with disappointment. But Margaret's eyes held such genuine warmth that Sarah found herself wanting to believe it. The weeks that followed established a pattern. Every Tuesday, Margaret and Jonathan arrived at 7. Every Tuesday, Sarah translated, recommended dishes, and stayed longer at their table than strictly professional. Margaret asked about Sarah's life with the casual interest of someone who actually cared about the answers. Where had she grown up? Did she have siblings? What were her dreams? Sarah answered carefully, editing out the painful parts. Yes, she'd grown up in Charleston. No siblings. Her father had passed away 3 years ago. Her mother was in a care facility. Dreams? She smiled and deflected. Serving good food to good people was enough. Jonathan rarely spoke during these exchanges, but Sarah felt his attention like heat from a fire. He watched her hands move, watched the way his mother's face lit up during their conversations, watched Sarah with an intensity that made her self-conscious about her worn uniform and tired eyes. It was during week 3 that Margaret extended the invitation. "Come to Sunday lunch," she signed as Sarah cleared their dessert plates. "Please, I'm rattling around that big house alone while Jonathan works. I'd love the company." Sarah's instinct was to refuse. She knew better than to blur the lines between server and served, between her world and theirs. But Margaret's face held such hope, and Jonathan added quietly, "It would mean a great deal to my mother, and honestly, to me as well." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. "I don't think that's appropriate, Mr. Prescott." "Jonathan," he corrected. "And why not? You've given my mother something precious, real conversation." "Let us return the favor. Just lunch. No obligations." Sarah looked between them. Margaret's pleading eyes, Jonathan's careful neutrality that didn't quite hide something underneath. She thought about her empty Sunday afternoons, the silence of her studio apartment, the loneliness that dogged her steps. "One lunch," she agreed, and tried to ignore the way her heart lifted at Margaret's delighted response. The Prescott Mansion sat on Charleston's Battery, where the Cooper River met the harbor and old money had built monuments to itself. Sarah stood on the sidewalk Sunday morning, staring up at white columns and black shutters, questioning every decision that had led her here. She'd worn her only decent dress, a simple navy sheath from her old life that she'd somehow kept through everything. It felt strange against her skin, like costume jewelry pretending to be real. Jonathan answered the door himself. No butler, no staff, just him in khakis and a white button-down, sleeves rolled to his elbows, looking younger and more uncertain than she'd ever seen him. "You came," he said, and she heard relief in those two words. "I said I would." People often say things they don't mean. There was a story in that statement, a wound that hadn't healed. Sarah recognized it because she carried similar scars. Margaret appeared behind him, signing, "Ignore my son. He's forgotten how to be human. Come in, dear. I want to show you everything." The house was beautiful. High ceilings, crown molding, antique furniture that belonged in museums. But it was also cold, impersonal, like a photograph of a home rather than an actual one. Margaret led Sarah through rooms that echoed with absence, past portraits of stern-faced Prescotts who'd made their fortune in shipping and never let anyone forget it. "My late wife decorated most of this," Jonathan said quietly as they passed through a formal living room that looked unused. "I haven't had the heart to change anything." "How long has she been gone?" 5 years. 5 years of living in a mausoleum to grief. Sarah understood that impulse. She'd been building her own monument to loss, brick by careful brick. Lunch was served in a sunroom overlooking the harbor, casual and intimate. Margaret kept up a steady stream of conversation in ASL, asking about Sarah's education, her interests, her life before Magnolias. Sarah found herself answering more honestly than she'd intended, drawn out by Margaret's genuine interest and Jonathan's thoughtful silence. "You went to USC," Jonathan said when Sarah mentioned her degree. "What did you study?" Sarah's throat tightened. Here it was, the moment where her carefully constructed invisibility would crack. "Business?" "Finance. That's a significant degree for someone working as a waitress." No judgment in his tone, just curiosity. Sometimes life doesn't go according to plan. "No," he agreed quietly. "It certainly doesn't." Margaret signed something to Jonathan, who translated, "My mother wants to know if you'd be willing to come back next week. She says she hasn't enjoyed herself this much in years." Sarah looked at Margaret's hopeful face, at Jonathan's careful neutrality, and felt the walls she'd built beginning to crumble. These people didn't know who she'd been, what she'd lost, how thoroughly she'd been destroyed. To them, she was just Sarah Wells, waitress with kind hands and patient heart. It was seductive, that anonymity, dangerous. "I'd like that," she said, and meant it. It was during the 4th Sunday visit that Jonathan's phone rang with the call that would change everything. He glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted. Something between anticipation and satisfaction. "I need to take this business." He stepped onto the veranda, and through the glass doors, Sarah could see him pacing, animated in a way she'd never witnessed. When he returned 10 minutes later, he was smiling. "Good news?" Margaret signed. "Very good. The Barrett Technologies partnership is moving forward. This could be the biggest deal Prescott Holdings has done in a decade." Sarah's coffee cup slipped from her fingers. It shattered against the marble floor, brown liquid spreading like accusation. She stared at the pieces, her mind unable to process what she'd just heard. Barrett Technologies. Richard Barrett. The room tilted sideways. "Sarah?" Jonathan's voice came from very far away. "Are you all right?" She couldn't breathe. The sunroom walls pressed inward, stealing oxygen. Richard's name echoed in her skull like a curse, like a prophecy, like the end of everything she'd been trying to rebuild. I need to go. Her voice sounded strange, mechanical. You're white as a sheet. Sit down. I need to go right now. Sarah stood on legs that barely held her, stumbling toward the door. Margaret's concerned face blurred with tears Sarah refused to let fall. Not here. Not in front of them. Jonathan followed her to the entrance. Sarah, please. Whatever I said. Barrett Technologies, she managed. Who runs it? Richard Barrett. Why? Do you know him? The laugh that escaped her throat was bitter and broken. You could say that. She reached for the door handle, desperate for escape, but Jonathan's hand covered hers. His touch was gentle but firm. Talk to me. I can't. Sarah. He stepped closer, and she could smell expensive cologne and laundry soap, and something underneath that was just him. Whatever this is, let me help. You can't help. No one can. She pulled away from his touch. Richard Barrett is the reason I'm serving tables instead of sitting across from you as an equal. He's the reason my father died believing his daughter was a thief. He's the reason I'm nobody. The words hung between them, ugly and true. Jonathan's face shifted through several expressions, confusion, realization, something that might have been rage. Tell me what he did. Why? So you can feel sorry for me? So you can offer charity? Sarah's voice broke. I have to go. She fled into the afternoon sunlight, leaving Jonathan standing in his doorway, Margaret appearing behind him with questions in her hands that Sarah couldn't stay to answer. She walked for hours through Charleston's historic district, past tourists taking photos and street musicians playing for tips, past lives being lived by people who hadn't been destroyed by their own trust, past the person she used to be. Her phone buzzed repeatedly. Jonathan calling. She let it ring. By the time Sarah reached her studio apartment, night had fallen. She sat on her second-hand couch in the darkness and let herself remember what she'd spent 2 years trying to forget. Richard Barrett had been her partner, her fiancé, her future, and he'd stolen everything. Jonathan called 17 times that night. Sarah let every call go to voicemail, then listened to each message in the darkness of her apartment, hating herself for the hope that flickered with each one. Sarah, please pick up. Whatever Richard Barrett did, we can fix it. My mother is worried. I'm worried. Just let me know you're safe. I've been researching. I need to understand what happened. Call me back. The final message came at 2 a.m. Jonathan's voice rough with exhaustion. I canceled tomorrow's meeting with Barrett. I won't move forward with someone who hurt you. Please, Sarah. Talk to me. She erased them all and didn't sleep. Tuesday came, and Sarah called in sick to Magnolia's for the first time in 6 months. She couldn't face table 7, couldn't smile through service while Jonathan sat across from his mother discussing business deals with the man who'd destroyed her life. Wednesday morning, someone knocked on her door. Sarah considered not answering. Her studio apartment in West Ashley wasn't the kind of place people like Jonathan Prescott visited. The building's paint peeled, the hallways smelled like old cooking oil, and her neighbors had learned not to ask questions about each other's circumstances. The knocking persisted. She opened the door to find Jonathan on her threshold, looking completely out of place in his tailored suit. Behind him, a black sedan idled at the curb. Probably cost more than this entire building. You found my address. Her voice was flat. I'm resourceful when motivated. He studied her face, noting the shadows under her eyes, the exhaustion that made her look older than her 28 years. May I come in? No. Sarah. You need to leave, Jonathan. Go back to your mansion and your business deals and forget you ever met the waitress who signed with your mother. I can't do that. Why not? You've known me a month. I'm nobody to you." His jaw tightened. "You're not nobody. And what Richard Barrett did to you, I need to understand it. Please." The please broke something in her. Sarah stepped aside and let him into her tiny world. 300 square feet of discount furniture and carefully maintained dignity. She watched him take in the details: the single hot plate, the futon that served as both couch and bed, the card table where she ate meals alone. "This is what he left me with," she said quietly. "This is what trust cost." Jonathan turned to face her, and the fury in his eyes was startling. "Tell me everything." So she did. Sarah told him about meeting Richard Barrett at USC 7 years ago, 2 scholarship students from different worlds, bonding over shared ambition and the outsider status that came with being poor among the privileged. She told him about falling in love while building something together, how they'd developed financial algorithms in her dorm room, dreaming of revolutionizing predictive trading. "We were good together," Sarah said, staring at her hands. "Not just romantically, professionally. I handled the technical development, he managed the business side. We were partners in every sense." She described how they'd incorporated after graduation, how Sarah's algorithms had attracted attention from major financial firms, how Richard proposed on the day their first client signed a 6-figure contract, how her father had walked her through the partnership agreements, making sure everything was fair and legal and protected. "Dad died 3 years ago. Cancer." Sarah's voice cracked. "Richard was wonderful during it all. Stayed by my side, handled the business so I could focus on Dad's care. I thought he was being supportive." "He was covering his tracks," Jonathan said, understanding dawning. "While I was watching my father die, Richard was systematically removing my name from everything. Patent applications were amended to list him as sole inventor. Partnership agreements were altered to show me as an employee, not a co-founder. He falsified documents showing I'd embezzled company funds to pay for Dad's medical bills." Jonathan's hands clenched into fists. "That's fraud." "That's Richard," Sarah laughed bitterly. 2 months after Dad's funeral, Richard filed charges against me, accused me of stealing intellectual property and money, froze my bank accounts, broke off our engagement in the most public way possible. Press release about how disappointed he was, how he'd trusted me, how he hoped I'd get the help I needed. The charges didn't stick. No, because they weren't true. But Richard knew that didn't matter. He dropped them right before trial, made himself look magnanimous, said he didn't want to ruin my life over a misunderstanding. But the damage was done. Everyone believed I was guilty. Who drops charges against someone unless they're certain of guilt but feeling charitable? Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the stuffy apartment. "No one would hire me. My reputation was destroyed. I'd spent everything fighting the charges. Then Mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and I had to place her in a facility I could barely afford. So you took the waitress job." "I took anything I could get. Cleaning offices at night, serving tables, whatever paid cash and didn't require references." She met his eyes. "I became invisible because being visible had cost me everything." Jonathan crossed the small space between them. "Why didn't you fight back? Sue him? Take him to court? With what money? What lawyers? Richard has a multi-million-dollar company built on my work. I have 300 square feet and a mother who doesn't remember my name." Sarah's voice broke. "The system protects people like him. People like me just survive." "Not anymore." Jonathan's voice was steel underneath velvet. "I'm going to help you." "You can't. He's too powerful, too careful. And your deal is canceled. I told you that in my message. Jonathan, that's a $500 million partnership." "I don't care." The 3 words hung between them, simple and devastating. "You should care," Sarah whispered. "Your board, your investors, your family legacy. My father built Prescott Holdings on one principle: Integrity. He told me that wealth without honor is just expensive poverty. Jonathan's hand reached out, cupping her face with surprising gentleness. I won't profit from stolen goods. I won't partner with a man who destroyed you. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you spent 10 minutes making my mother feel seen when you could have walked away. I know you work 3 jobs to care for a mother who doesn't recognize you. I know you rebuilt yourself from nothing and still found room for kindness. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. I know you're the strongest person I've ever met, and Richard Barrett will pay for what he did. Sarah felt tears threatening, the first she'd allowed since that terrible day 2 years ago when her life imploded. Why are you doing this? Because my wife died 5 years ago while I was in a business meeting. Because I chose a conference call over dinner with her, and she drove home alone in the rain, and a drunk driver ran a red light. His voice cracked. I've spent 5 years telling myself that success matters more than people. You've reminded me I was wrong. Jonathan, let me help you. Please. The pleas undid her. Sarah collapsed against his chest and finally let herself cry. For her father, for her mother, for the person she used to be, for the trust that had been weaponized against her. Jonathan held her through it all, one hand steady on her back, the other cradling her head like she was something precious instead of broken. When the tears subsided, Sarah pulled back and wiped her eyes. Even if you want to help, there's no evidence. Richard destroyed everything. Are you sure? Jonathan's expression was thoughtful. Everything? Sarah froze, the cloud backup. She'd forgotten about the automatic backup system she'd set up years ago, paranoid even then about losing her work. She'd been too devastated, too overwhelmed to remember it during the legal battle. I might have original development files, with timestamps, metadata showing when everything was created and on what device. Then we start there. Jonathan pulled out his phone. I'm calling my legal team. And Sarah, this time you're not fighting alone. For the first time in 2 years, Sarah let herself believe that justice might be possible. Jonathan's legal team descended on Sarah's apartment like a surgical strike force. Charles Morrison, senior partner at Charleston's most prestigious law firm, arrived with 2 associates and enough technology to stock a small office. They worked through the night, recovering files Sarah had thought lost forever. The evidence was damning. Original patent applications bore Sarah's digital signature with timestamps predating Richard's versions by 6 months. Development notes in her handwriting, photographed and cloud-saved, showed the evolution of algorithms Richard now claimed as his own. Email threads captured his requests for her to explain her own code because he couldn't understand the technical architecture. This is airtight, Charles said at 3 in the morning, his tie loosened and reading glasses perched on his nose. Falsification of federal patent documents, fraud, possibly RICO violations if we can prove a pattern of behavior. Can we? Jonathan asked from his position by the window where he'd stood guard for hours. I've already identified 3 other former employees with similar stories. One is willing to testify. Charles looked at Sarah. Miss Wells, with your permission, I'd like to file a civil suit by Friday and notify the FBI's white-collar crime division. Sarah's hands trembled. Richard will fight back. He always does. Let him. Jonathan's voice was cold steel. This time he's fighting someone with resources. The Prescott Holdings Board meeting the following Monday was a massacre. Jonathan presented his findings methodically. Every document, every email, every piece of evidence that Richard Barrett had built his company on stolen intellectual property. The conference room fell silent as the PowerPoint clicked through slide after devastating slide. You want us to cancel a $500 million deal, Walter Simmons said finally. The eldest board member, 73 and sharp as broken glass, steeped his fingers. Based on the word of a waitress. Based on federal documents and forensic evidence, Jonathan corrected. Sarah Wells isn't making accusations. She's stating facts backed by timestamps, metadata, and witness testimony. A waitress you're romantically involved with, another board member added. This looks like emotional decision-making, Jonathan, not sound business practice. What's unsound is partnering with a criminal. Jonathan's voice could have frozen the harbor outside. Barrett Technologies' entire valuation is built on stolen algorithms. If we proceed, we become complicit in fraud. When, not if, this comes to light, our reputation is destroyed along with his. If it comes to light, it's already in motion. I've notified the FBI. Charles Morrison is filing civil suits. This will be public within days. Jonathan leaned forward. The question isn't whether Richard Barrett falls. The question is whether we fall with him. Walter Simmons studied Jonathan for a long moment. Your father would have handled this differently. My father would have walked away the moment he learned the truth. Integrity wasn't negotiable to him. It shouldn't be to us. Even at the cost of $500 million? Especially then. What's our integrity worth if we only maintain it when it's convenient? The room erupted into argument, some board members furious, others thoughtful, all recognizing that Jonathan had backed them into a corner. If they proceeded with Barrett now, they'd be gambling the company's reputation on the hope that the fraud stayed hidden. It was Walter who finally spoke. Motion to terminate negotiations with Barrett Technologies and authorize legal action to recover costs already invested. Seconded. The vote was 7-2. Jonathan left the boardroom and drove directly to Sarah's apartment. He found her pacing, wearing a path in the thin carpet, her phone clutched in white-knuckled hands. "Richard called," she said without preamble. "He knows you're investigating. He says I'm making a mistake, that he'll bury me in legal fees I can't afford, destroy what's left of my reputation, make sure I never work in this city again. He's scared. He's angry. You don't know what he's like when he's angry." Jonathan crossed to her, taking her cold hands in his. "Then it's good you're not facing him alone this time. Your board voted to end the partnership. Barrett Technologies is done." Sarah's knees buckled. Jonathan caught her, guiding her to sit on the futon, crouching before her. The relief on her face was almost painful to witness. 2 years of fear releasing in a shuddering breath. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me for doing what's right." He brushed hair from her face. "Sarah, there's something else. The board meeting made me realize something." "What?" "That I'm in love with you." The words hung between them, simple and devastating. "You can't be," Sarah said automatically. "You barely know me, and I'm brilliant, kind, stronger than anyone I've ever met." Jonathan's thumb traced her cheekbone. "I've been dead for 5 years, Sarah. You brought me back to life. You reminded me that some things matter more than money, more than business, more than the safe emotional distance I've been hiding behind." "Jonathan, this is happening too fast. The investigation, your feelings, I know, and I'm not asking you to feel the same way. I'm just telling you the truth." He stood, creating space between them. "I'm going to fight for you whether you love me back or not. Because it's right, because you deserve justice. But I wanted you to know where I stand." Sarah looked up at him. This man who'd walked away from $500 million for a woman he'd known 6 weeks. This man who'd seen her at her lowest and chosen to lift her up instead of walking away. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Of Richard? Of this? Of trusting someone again? Of believing you won't wake up one day and realize I'm not worth the cost?" Jonathan knelt before her again, taking both her hands. "Richard made you believe you weren't worth fighting for. He was wrong, and I'm going to prove it to you every single day if you'll let me." Margaret Prescott had opinions about the situation, delivered in rapid-fire sign language over Sunday lunch the following week. "About time," she signed to Sarah while Jonathan was in the kitchen. "He's been half dead since Catherine." You've woken him up. This is complicated, Sarah signed back. The investigation, his board, Richard, love is always complicated. That's how you know it's real. Margaret's hands stilled, her expression turning serious. My son is a good man, Sarah, but he's been hiding from life since his wife died. He chose work over her too many times, and guilt has been eating him alive. You're giving him a chance at redemption. That's not fair to me, being someone's redemption. You're not. You're being yourself, and he loves who that is. Margaret reached across the table, taking Sarah's hand. But I understand if you're not ready. Lord knows you've earned the right to protect your heart. I want to trust him. I'm just so scared. Of course you are. Trust is always a risk. But some people are worth the risk. The words echoed later as Sarah lay awake in her apartment, staring at the ceiling. Jonathan had been nothing but honorable, respecting her boundaries, fighting for her justice, asking nothing in return. But Richard had been honorable too, once. Before ambition had twisted him into someone unrecognizable, could she risk her heart again? Could she afford not to? Her phone buzzed with a message from Jonathan. Legal team found 2 more victims willing to testify. Case strengthening. How are you holding up? Sarah typed back, scared, hopeful, confused. Thank you for everything. Nothing to thank me for. Get some rest. Tomorrow we keep fighting. She stared at the message, at the simple assurance that she wasn't alone in this battle, at the quiet promise of a man who showed up day after day, asking nothing but giving everything. Maybe Margaret was right. Maybe some people were worth the risk. Sarah sent one more message before sleep finally claimed her. Jonathan, I'm glad you walked into Magnolia's. I'm glad your mother taught me what it means to be seen. His response came immediately. I'm glad you were brave enough to help a deaf woman in a restaurant. You changed my life, Sarah Wells. Now let me help change yours back. For the first time in 2 years, Sarah fell asleep believing that justice and maybe even love might actually be possible. The Charleston Post broke the story 3 weeks later. Tech CEO accused of massive intellectual property theft blazed across the front page with Richard Barrett's professional headshot beside a photo of Sarah they'd pulled from her old LinkedIn profile, back when she'd worn confidence like armor and believed the world was fair. Sarah's phone rang before dawn. Reporters. Her apartment building's lobby filled with cameras. Someone had leaked her address, and now the privacy she'd carefully constructed was shredded like tissue paper. Don't answer the door, Jonathan said when she called him, voice shaking. I'm sending a car. Pack a bag. You're staying at the house until this dies down. I can't impose. You're not imposing. You're accepting help. There's a difference. The media storm was worse than Sarah had imagined. Every news outlet in South Carolina picked up the story. Then the nationals. CNN, MSNBC, Fox Business, all running segments about the pretty waitress and the tech fraud, the billionaire who'd walked away from fortune for justice, the American dream turned nightmare. Some coverage was sympathetic. Sarah as victim, Richard as predator, Jonathan as white knight, but others were vicious. Gold digger uses rich boyfriend to destroy ex-fiancé. Waitress claims theft after relationship ends badly. Prescott Ayres' judgment questioned. Is he being manipulated? The comment sections were worse. Anonymous voices declaring Sarah a liar, a whore, someone too stupid or lazy to succeed, who blamed her failures on a man. Richard's supporters emerged from everywhere, former colleagues who insisted he was brilliant and honest, business partners who swore he'd never stolen anything, women who claimed Sarah had always been jealous and vindictive. Sarah stopped reading after the first day, but the damage was done. Magnolia's fired her over the phone. Too much negative attention, the manager explained without apology. We serve a certain clientele, and having you here creates discomfort. 2 other part-time jobs followed suit. Within 48 hours, Sarah had lost every source of income. The nursing home called next. We've had reporters harassing our staff, upsetting other residents' families. We think it might be best if Mrs. Wells were transferred to another facility. Sarah sat in Margaret's guest room, decorated in soft blues and whites, probably worth more than everything Sarah had ever owned, and felt her carefully rebuilt life crumbling again. She'd fought so hard to survive the first destruction. She didn't know if she had strength for a second. Jonathan found her there, staring at nothing. "Talk to me," he said quietly, sitting beside her on the bed. "I lost my jobs. All of them. They're moving my mother to a different facility because reporters won't leave them alone." Her voice was hollow. "I'm exactly where Richard wanted me. Nowhere, with nothing dependent on someone else's charity." "This isn't charity, isn't it?" Sarah turned to face him. "You're housing me, feeding me, paying my mother's care. Your legal team works for free because you asked them to. I'm a kept woman, Jonathan, just a different kind than the ones your board thinks I am." "That's not true, isn't it? Look at us. Look at this room. Look at what you've spent fighting Richard while I contribute nothing but problems." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "You think you're contributing nothing? Sarah, you're the strongest person I know. You survived 2 years of hell and still found kindness for a deaf stranger. You rebuilt yourself from nothing. That's not weakness, that's steel." "Steel that's costing you everything," she whispered. "Your board wants you gone. Your social circle has frozen you out. The press is questioning your judgment. And for what? A waitress who can't even keep a job? For justice. For what's right. For you." He took her hands. "Sarah, I don't care what the board thinks. I don't care what Charleston society whispers at their country clubs. I care that Richard Barrett stole your life and I have the power to help you take it back. But I'm drowning you in the process. Then we'll drown together, better than floating alone." The argument that had been building for days finally erupted. "You don't understand," Sarah said, standing, pacing. "You've never had nothing. You've never been one crisis away from homelessness. You can afford to fight on principle because you have a safety net made of old money and family legacy. I don't have that luxury." "So what are you saying, that you want to stop? Let Richard win?" "I'm saying maybe the cost is too high. Maybe some battles aren't worth fighting." Jonathan stood too, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw real anger flash across his face. "You don't mean that." "Don't tell me what I mean. You have no idea what it's like to be me, to have everything stripped away and then watch it happen again in slow motion." "You're right. I don't know what that's like. But I know what it's like to lose someone because I chose wrong. I know what it's like to live with regret so heavy it crushes you." His voice broke. "Catherine died because I prioritized a business deal over dinner, because I said just this once, just this call, just this meeting. And she drove home alone in the rain, and I never saw her alive again." Sarah stilled, recognizing the raw wound beneath his words. "I can't bring Catherine back," Jonathan continued, "but I can choose right this time. I can stand beside someone who needs standing beside. I can use my privilege for something that matters instead of just accumulating more zeros in a bank account." He moved closer. "Don't ask me to walk away from you, Sarah. Don't ask me to choose money over principle. I've already lived that life. It's hollow. I'm not asking you to walk away. I'm saying maybe I should." The words hung between them like a blade. "You want to leave." His voice went flat. "I want to stop destroying your life. What if I think my life is better with you in it? What if fighting for you is the first meaningful thing I've done in 5 years? "That's not fair," Sarah whispered. "I can't be your redemption, Jonathan. I can't be the reason you forgive yourself for Catherine. That's too much weight for anyone to carry." "Is that what you think this is? Some guilt-driven rescue fantasy? Isn't it? Jonathan stepped back as if she'd struck him. I fell in love with you because of who you are, not what you represent. Yes, helping you helps me forgive myself. But that doesn't make my feelings less real. It doesn't make what we're fighting for less important. I can't do this, Sarah said, tears finally breaking free. I can't watch you sacrifice everything while I have nothing to offer in return. I can't be the person who ruins you. You're not ruining me, you're saving me. You don't need saving. You need someone who's your equal, not your charity case. Stop calling yourself that, Jonathan said fiercely. You're not a charity case. You're not weak. You're not worth less because Richard stole from you. You're brilliant and kind, and you deserve justice. And if you can't see that, it's because he's still winning. The truth of that hit Sarah like cold water. Richard was still controlling her, not through active malice anymore, but through the internalized belief that she was worthless, that she deserved destruction, that accepting help meant admitting defeat. I'm so tired, she said quietly. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of being strong. I'm tired of watching everything I touch turn to poison. Jonathan crossed the space between them and pulled her into his arms. Then stop being strong for a minute. Stop fighting alone. Let someone else carry the weight. Sarah collapsed against his chest and cried, for her father, for her mother, for the woman she used to be, for the trust Richard had weaponized. Jonathan held her through it all, one hand steady on her back, murmuring words she couldn't quite hear but felt in her bones. When the tears finally subsided, Sarah pulled back enough to see his face. I'm falling in love with you, she admitted. And it terrifies me. Good, Jonathan said with the ghost of a smile. Love should be terrifying. It means it matters. What if Richard wins? What if we lose everything? Then we lose it together. But Sarah? He cupped her face in both hands. We're not going to lose. Because this time you're not fighting alone. This time you have resources and lawyers and someone who believes you. Richard's been winning because he made you think you were powerless. You're not. Not anymore. Promise me something, Sarah whispered. Anything. If this gets too expensive, if fighting for me starts to genuinely hurt you, promise you'll walk away. I can't watch you destroy yourself for my justice. Jonathan's expression was absolutely serious. I promise that if fighting for you ever stops being the right thing to do, I'll tell you. But Sarah, that's never going to happen. Justice isn't expensive. It's priceless. 2 days later, Richard's lawyer called with an offer. Mr. Barrett is willing to pay $10 million for Ms. Wells to sign a non-disclosure agreement and drop all charges, Charles Morrison explained to Sarah and Jonathan in his office. He'll publicly state that there was a misunderstanding, make a charitable donation in her father's name, and they both move on. $10 million, Sarah repeated numbly. Approximately what your algorithms are worth in current market value, plus punitive damages. Charles pushed his glasses up. It's a significant offer. It's admission of guilt without consequences, Jonathan said. He buys his way out, Sarah stays silent, and he keeps operating. It would solve a lot of problems, Sarah said quietly. My mother's care, my debts, living expenses. I could rebuild. You could, Charles agreed. But you'd have to stay silent about what he did. No interviews, no testimony against him if other victims come forward, no discussion of the case in any form. Sarah looked at Jonathan. What do you think? I think it's your decision, your life he destroyed, your choice how to move forward. That's not an answer. Yes, it is. Jonathan took her hand. I'll support whatever you decide. If you take the money, I understand. If you keep fighting, I'm beside you. Either way, I'm here. Sarah stared at Charles's notes. $10 million written in stark black ink. Enough to fix everything money could fix. Enough to disappear, start over, build something new. But it wouldn't give her father his pride back. wouldn't clear her name, wouldn't stop Richard from doing this to someone else. "No," she said finally. "Tell him no." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Miss Wells, that's a significant amount of—" "I know what it is, and I know what it costs. My silence while he continues destroying people." Sarah straightened in her chair. "My father taught me that some things aren't for sale. Turns out integrity is one of them." Jonathan's hand tightened on hers, and when she looked at him, the pride in his eyes was worth more than Richard's blood money. "Tell Mr. Barrett we'll see him in court," Sarah said. "And this time I'm not fighting alone." The deposition took place in a sterile conference room on the 40th floor of Morris & Webb's downtown office. Sarah sat across from Richard Barrett for the first time in 2 years, separated by 12 feet of polished mahogany and an ocean of betrayal. He looked different, thinner, with shadows under his eyes that expensive suits couldn't hide. His hair was graying at the temples, premature aging from stress, perhaps, but his eyes held the same calculating intelligence that had once attracted her and ultimately destroyed her. "For the record," Charles Morrison began, "please state your name and relationship to Ms. Sarah Wells." "Richard Thomas Barrett. I'm the CEO of Barrett Technologies. Sarah and I were engaged several years ago. We also had a brief business partnership that ended amicably." Sarah's fingernails bit into her palms. Amicably, as if he hadn't systematically dismantled her life. "Mr. Barrett, can you explain how Barrett Technologies came to hold patents on 17 different algorithmic trading systems?" "I developed them over several years. The work was mine." "All 17 algorithms?" "Yes." Charles slid a folder across the table. "These are development notes dated 18 months before your patent applications. Notes in Ms. Wells's handwriting. Can you explain that?" Richard barely glanced at them. "Sarah assisted with some preliminary research, but the actual development and refinement was my work." "Assisted?" Charles's voice was dangerously soft. "Can you explain these emails where you ask Ms. Wells to clarify technical specifications of code she supposedly only assisted with?" "Collaborative process. I wanted her input. On your own work. On our joint project." "A joint project where only your name appears on the patents, the incorporation documents, and all financial records." Charles produced another folder. "Can you explain why original partnership agreements list Ms. Wells as co-founder, but amended versions show her only as an employee?" For the first time, Richard's composure cracked. Those amendments were made with proper legal counsel. Sarah's role changed as the company evolved. Changed how? She became less involved in technical development. Sarah couldn't stay silent. "That's a lie." Richard's eyes met hers for the first time. Something flickered there, guilt perhaps, or the ghost of what they'd once been to each other. "Sarah," he said quietly, "can we talk? Just the two of us?" Charles started to refuse, but Sarah held up a hand. "Give us 5 minutes." The lawyers filed out reluctantly. Jonathan squeezed her shoulder before leaving. "I'll be right outside." When the door closed, silence filled the space between them like poison gas. "You look good," Richard said finally. "Better than I expected." "What did you expect? That I'd still be broken?" "I expected you to take the settlement. $10 million, Sarah. That's more than most people see in a lifetime. It's less than what you stole from me." Richard flinched. "I didn't steal from you. I built something from what we started together. By erasing me from it. By filing false charges. By making sure no one would ever hire me again." Sarah leaned forward. "You didn't just take my work, Richard. You took my father's last months of believing his daughter was honest. You took my mother's care. You took my name, my reputation, my future. You took everything. I gave you an escape. His voice rose, defensive now. The charges were dropped. I didn't have to do that. You dropped them after everyone already believed I was guilty. That's not mercy, that's calculated cruelty. It was survival. Richard slammed his hand on the table. You don't understand what it was like. Growing up in that trailer with my drunk father, watching my mother leave, finding my brother dead from an overdose. You had everything. A family that loved you, education, options. I had poverty and terror and no way out except to be smarter, harder, better than everyone else. So you became exactly what you hated. You became someone who destroys people weaker than himself. The words hit him like a physical blow. Richard sagged in his chair, suddenly looking older than his 35 years. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he said quietly. It started small, just taking credit for one thing, then another. Then your father got sick, and you were distracted. And I saw an opportunity to secure the patents while you weren't paying attention. I told myself I'd make it right later. Share profits, give you credit eventually. But you didn't. No. Because then the company took off. We got offers, investors, attention. And I realized that if anyone knew you'd done the technical work, they'd want you, not me. I'd be nothing again, the poor kid from the trailer park who got lucky. His voice cracked. I couldn't go back to being nothing, Sarah. I couldn't. So you made me nothing instead. Yes. The admission hung between them. I made you nothing so I could be something, and I've hated myself every day since. Sarah studied his face, seeing real anguish there. Part of her, the part that had loved him once, wanted to offer comfort, but a stronger part remembered her father's funeral, her mother's confusion, the 2 years of invisible survival. You could have chosen differently, she said. At any point you could have stopped, told the truth, made it right. I know, but you chose yourself, every single time. I did. Richard looked at her fully now, tears tracking down his face. I chose wrong, Sarah. I chose survival over love, money over integrity, success over you. And I've been empty ever since. Every achievement feels hollow. Every success tastes like ash. Because I know what it cost. I know who I destroyed to get here. Is that supposed to make me feel better, that you're suffering too? No. It's supposed to explain why I'm not fighting this anymore. He pushed a folder across the table. Full confession. Every patent I stole, every document I falsified, every lie I told. It's all here. Signed, notarized, ready for the court. Sarah opened the folder with trembling hands. Pages and pages of admissions, technical specifications showing her original work, timeline documentation proving systematic fraud. Everything Charles had been trying to extract through depositions handed over freely. Why? She whispered. Because you were right. I became my father, the man I hated most, destroying people to feel powerful. Richard wiped his eyes roughly. I can't undo what I did, but I can stop doing more damage. I can tell the truth, accept the consequences, and maybe become someone I don't hate. You'll go to prison. Probably. Federal fraud charges don't get dismissed easily. He smiled bitterly. Ironic, isn't it? I destroyed you to avoid poverty. Now I'll lose everything anyway. Richard, don't. He held up a hand. Don't forgive me. I don't deserve it. Just take the confession and get your life back. Build something beautiful with Jonathan Prescott. Be happy. That's all I want now. To know that you're happy despite what I did. The door opened. Charles entered, followed by Richard's lawyer, whose face had gone pale. My client wishes to make a statement, the lawyer said, voice strained. Against my strong legal advice. Richard stood, straightening his tie with shaking hands. I, Richard Thomas Barrett, confessed to 17 counts of patent fraud, falsification of federal documents, and systematic intellectual property theft from Sarah Christine Wells. Everything attributed to me was developed by her. I stole her work, destroyed her reputation to cover my theft, and built Barrett Technologies on her stolen algorithms. I am prepared to face criminal charges and civil liability. The room erupted. Charles's associates scrambling for recording devices, Richard's lawyer arguing frantically, Sarah sitting frozen in disbelief. Jonathan appeared beside her, his hand finding hers. Did he just confess everything? Sarah looked at Richard across the chaos. He confessed everything. Richard met her eyes one last time. I loved you, he said quietly, barely audible over the commotion. I just loved success more. I'm sorry, Sarah, for everything. They arrested him that evening. Sarah watched the news coverage from Margaret's living room, Richard in handcuffs being led from his office building while reporters shouted questions. Barrett Technologies' stock plummeted. Investors filed lawsuits. The FBI announced a full investigation into corporate fraud. How do you feel? Jonathan asked, sitting beside her on the couch. I don't know. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. I wanted justice. I wanted him to pay. But now that he is, you feel sorry for him. Is that wrong? It's human. Jonathan pulled her against his side. He's a broken person who made terrible choices. You can acknowledge his pain while still holding him accountable. He confessed to save me, to give me my life back. He confessed because he couldn't live with himself anymore. That's different. Jonathan kissed her temple. Don't make him noble, Sarah. He had 2 years to tell the truth. He only did it when cornered and facing exposure anyway. I know. But still. Margaret appeared in the doorway, signing, Guilt is not the same as redemption. He feels bad. Good. He should. But feeling bad doesn't undo harm. Your mother's right, Jonathan said. Richard Barrett destroyed your life. His confession doesn't erase 2 years of suffering, it just stops the bleeding. Sarah nodded slowly, understanding but still conflicted. Richard had been a monster. But he'd also been human. Broken by his own trauma, twisted by poverty's desperation into something cruel. She couldn't forgive him, but she could understand him. What happens now? She asked. Now? Jonathan smiled. Now we rebuild. Together. 6 months passed like the turning of seasons, slow at first, then suddenly complete. Spring arrived in Charleston with azaleas blooming pink and white along Battery Street where Sarah and Jonathan walked most evenings after dinner. The city that had witnessed her destruction now watched her resurrection. And Sarah found she no longer cared what Charleston society whispered behind their monogrammed napkins. Richard Barrett pleaded guilty to 17 counts of federal fraud and was sentenced to 5 years in minimum security prison. Barrett Technologies dissolved, assets liquidated to pay restitution. 3 other victims came forward with their own stories, and Richard testified against himself in each case, accepting responsibility without lawyers twisting his words into excuses. The courts returned Sarah's patents with her name restored. The algorithms she'd developed, now proven beyond doubt to be her work, were valued at $87 million in current market applications. Major financial firms competed to license them. Sarah chose 3 carefully, insisting on ethical use clauses and profit sharing with the developers who would implement her work. You could retire, Jonathan said one evening as they reviewed contracts in his study. Never work again if you didn't want to. That's not living, that's just existing comfortably. Sarah set down her pen. I want to build something that helps people like me, people who get crushed by those with more power and resources. What did you have in mind? She showed him the business plan she'd been developing. Wells IP Protection Consulting, a firm that would help small inventors and developers protect their intellectual property from predatory partners. Sliding scale fees, pro bono work for those who couldn't afford lawyers, education programs teaching entrepreneurs how to safeguard their innovations. I want to be what I needed 2 years ago, Sarah explained. Someone with resources and knowledge who fights for people without power. Jonathan read through her proposal, his expression growing more admiring with each page. This is brilliant. You're essentially creating a shield for the vulnerable. My father used to say that education without application is just expensive entertainment. I learned the hard way how the system fails people. Now I want to fix it, one case at a time. I'd like to invest. As a silent partner, you'd run everything, make all decisions. But let me provide startup capital and connections. Sarah hesitated, old fears surfacing. Jonathan, I can't take more from you. You're not taking. I'm investing in a sound business model and a brilliant founder. This isn't charity, Sarah. This is smart business, he smiled. Though I admit I have a personal interest in seeing you succeed. They sealed the partnership with a kiss that tasted like new beginnings. Margaret threw an engagement party in May, insisting that Charleston society needed to formally accept Sarah into the Prescott family. The guest list included old money families, business associates, and, at Sarah's insistence, every service worker from Magnolia's who'd been kind during her invisible months. Sarah wore a simple cream dress, her grandmother's pearls, and her mother's wedding ring on a chain around her neck. She moved through the garden party with Jonathan at her side, introducing herself not as the waitress or the victim, but as Dr. Sarah Wells, founder of Wells IP Protection. Some guests were gracious, others barely masked their disapproval, the Prescott heir marrying so far below his station after such scandal. Sarah caught snippets of whispered conversations. Gold digger, opportunist, that woman. She didn't care anymore. Let them whisper. She knew her worth now, and it had nothing to do with their approval. The most meaningful moment came when Emily Chen approached, the young waitress from Magnolia's who'd covered Sarah's shifts during the worst of the media storm. Ms. Wells? Emily's hands twisted nervously. I just wanted to say thank you for showing us that fighting back is possible, that people like us matter. People like us? Sarah took her hand. Emily, we're not different from them. We just started in different places. Never let anyone convince you that circumstance determines worth. I'm going back to college, Emily said shyly, finishing my engineering degree. Because of you. After Emily left, Jonathan found Sarah crying happy tears by the rose garden. What's wrong? He pulled her close. Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. That girl, she's going back to school because she saw me survive, because I showed her it was possible. Sarah looked up at him. My father would be proud. He is proud. Wherever he is, he sees what you've become. The wedding took place in early autumn, when Charleston's brutal summer heat finally broke, and the city remembered how to breathe. They married in the garden behind the Prescott mansion, beneath an arbor wound with white roses and jasmine. Sarah walked herself down the aisle, no one to give her away because she belonged to herself. But halfway to the altar, she paused. Her mother sat in the front row, brought from the memory care facility for the occasion. Margaret Wells stared into middle distance, not recognizing the ceremony or her daughter. Sarah knelt before her mother and took her weathered hands. Mom, it's Sarah. I'm getting married today. I wish you could be here for it. Her mother's eyes focused suddenly, miraculously. Sarah? Her voice was thread-thin but clear. My Sarah? Yes, Mama, it's me. You look so beautiful, like my wedding day. Margaret Wells touched Sarah's face with trembling fingers. Your father would be so proud. Are you happy, baby? Tears streamed down Sarah's face. Yes, Mama. I'm so happy. Then I'm happy too. Her mother's clarity was already fading, eyes growing distant again, but she'd given Sarah the gift of one lucid moment, acknowledgement, blessing, love. Sarah stood, composed herself, and continued to the altar where Jonathan waited with tear-filled eyes of his own. Margaret Prescott officiated, hands moving in American Sign Language while Jonathan translated aloud. The ceremony was bilingual, spoken and signed, honoring the connection that had brought Sarah and Jonathan together. Do you, Sarah Christine Wells, take this man as your husband? To stand beside him in joy and sorrow, to build a life of integrity and love, to choose him daily as he chooses you? Sarah signed and spoke simultaneously. I do. Do you, Jonathan Michael Prescott, take this woman as your wife, to honor her strength, to support her dreams, to never ask her to be less than she is? I do, Jonathan said, voice thick with emotion. Then, by the power vested in me by the state of South Carolina and the love that brought you together, I pronounce you married. Kiss your bride, son. Jonathan cupped Sarah's face and kissed her like a promise kept, like a future beginning, like a man who understood that love was a daily choice, not a destination. The reception lasted until midnight. Sarah danced with Jonathan, with Margaret, with Charles Morrison, who'd fought so hard for her justice. She danced with Emily Chen and the other Magnolia's servers, who'd become unlikely friends. She danced with Walter Simmons from the Prescott board, who admitted grudgingly that Jonathan had been right about integrity mattering more than profit. Near evening's end, a letter arrived by private courier. Sarah opened it in the garden, away from guests. The handwriting was Richard's. Dear Sarah, I know I have no right to write to you on your wedding day, but my therapist says part of genuine remorse is acknowledging what I destroyed, including the future we could have had. I'm not asking forgiveness, I'm not expecting response. I'm simply saying, I see now what love actually means. It means wanting someone's happiness, even when you're not the source. It means being glad they survived you. I'm glad you survived me, Sarah. I'm glad you found someone who sees your worth. I'm glad you're building the life I prevented you from having. You deserve better than me. You deserve everything good. I hope Jonathan Prescott understands what a gift you are. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to become someone worthy of the love you once gave me. I'll fail. I'm too broken, started too wrong. But I'll try. That's all I can offer now. Effort, honesty, painful, late-arriving truth. Be happy, Sarah. You earned it. Through fire. Richard. Sarah folded the letter carefully and slipped it into her bag. She didn't owe Richard forgiveness, but she could acknowledge his humanity, could recognize that people were complicated, capable of terrible cruelty and genuine remorse simultaneously. Jonathan found her in the garden. Everything all right? Yes. She took his hand. Richard sent a letter, wishing us well. How do you feel about that? Sad for him, grateful for us. She squeezed his fingers. He made horrible choices, but he's trying to be better. That's all anyone can do, try to be better than they were. You're remarkably compassionate for someone he tried to destroy. Not compassionate. Just clear-eyed. Sarah looked up at her husband. That word still felt miraculous, and smiled. I can acknowledge his humanity without giving him power over mine. He doesn't get to live rent-free in my head anymore. They returned to the reception, where Margaret was teaching a group of delighted guests basic ASL phrases. Sarah watched the deaf community she'd helped include mingling with Charleston's elite, watched barriers dissolving through simple communication, and felt her father's legacy alive in the moment. Near midnight, Jonathan and Sarah slipped away to their new home. Not the Prescott mansion, but a renovated historic house they'd chosen together. smaller, warmer, theirs. "Happy?" Jonathan asked, as they stood on the porch, looking at their front door. "Deliriously." Sarah kissed him. "Scared too. Happiness still feels dangerous, like something that can be stolen. It can't. Not this kind." He unlocked the door and lifted her across the threshold. "This kind we built. Together. From honest foundation, it's not going anywhere." They made love slowly, carefully. Two people learning each other's languages. Afterward, Sarah lay in Jonathan's arms and let herself believe in permanence again. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me. That first night at Magnolia's, when I was invisible to everyone else. You saw me. You made yourself impossible not to see." Jonathan kissed her forehead. "You showed kindness when you could have walked away. You fought back when you could have accepted defeat. You chose integrity over easy money. You're remarkable, Sarah Wells Prescott. I didn't save you. You saved yourself. I just got to watch." Sarah turned to face him fully. "No. I saved myself with your help. There's a difference. I needed you. Your resources, your belief, your stubborn refusal to let me give up. I couldn't have done it alone. Maybe we saved each other. Maybe we did." 1 year after the wedding, Sarah stood at a podium addressing a room full of entrepreneurs, small business owners, and independent developers. Wells' IP protection had grown beyond her wildest projections. 12 employees, hundreds of clients, a reputation for taking on powerful corporations that exploited the vulnerable. "Intellectual property theft isn't just about money," Sarah told her audience. "It's about erasing someone's existence, about powerful people deciding that your ideas, your work, your identity matter less than their profit margins. I'm here to tell you that you matter. Your innovations matter. And there are people willing to fight for you." After her speech, a young woman approached, maybe 23, nervous, carrying a prototype in a battered backpack. "Ms. Prescott, I invented a medical device. A company wants to partner with me, but their contract says they'd own all intellectual property. I don't know what to do." Sarah took her card. "Call my office Monday. We'll review the contract pro bono. You should never sign away your work without understanding what you're giving up." "Why are you helping me?" "You don't know me." "Because someone helped me once, and because kindness multiplies." Sarah smiled. "Your invention could save lives. The world deserves to know your name alongside it." That evening, Sarah visited her mother at the memory care facility, the nicest in Charleston, with gardens and art therapy and staff who treated residents with dignity. Margaret Wells sat by the window watching birds at a feeder. "Hi, Mama," Sarah said, taking the chair beside her. Her mother turned, eyes vacant. "Are you my nurse?" "I'm your daughter, Sarah." "I had a daughter once. She was very smart. Won awards. She still does." Sarah took her mother's hand. "She just won the Charleston Small Business Award, and she got married to a wonderful man. And she thinks about you every single day." "That's nice," her mother said vaguely. Then, surprising them both, "Is she happy?" "Yes, Mama. She's very happy." "Good. That's all a mother wants, for her baby to be happy." Sarah stayed until sunset reading aloud from her father's old letters. Her mother didn't remember who'd written them, but she smiled at the words about kindness, integrity, and choosing compassion even when it cost something. Jonathan was waiting when Sarah returned home, dinner ready, jazz playing softly. This was their rhythm now. Work that mattered. Evenings together, weekends helping Margaret with her deaf community center, monthly visits to check on Richard's progress in prison, where he taught other inmates about ethical business practices. "How's your mother?" Jonathan asked as they ate. "The same. A few clear moments, mostly gone." Sarah sipped her wine. "But I think she knows somewhere deep down, that I'm okay, that I survived. That's enough. After dinner, they walked to the Battery and watched ships navigate Charleston Harbor. Sarah thought about her journey, from invisible waitress to successful businesswoman, from broken victim to married woman building a life of purpose. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Jonathan. "Walking away from the Barrett deal, the money you lost fighting for me?" "Never, not once." He pulled her close. "You know what I regret? The years I wasted chasing money instead of meaning, the time I prioritized business over Catherine, the life I lived before you reminded me what actually matters." "And what actually matters?" "This." He gestured at the harbor, the city, the life they'd built. "Love, justice, using privilege responsibly, choosing right even when it's expensive. You taught me that, Sarah. You saved me from becoming someone I'd have hated." Sarah rested her head on his shoulder and let herself feel the fullness of her life now. The work that mattered, the love that sustained, the justice hard-won, the future bright with purpose. "I used to think happiness was fragile," she said quietly. "Something that could shatter at any moment, but this feels different, like bedrock. Because we built it honestly. No secrets, no shortcuts, no stolen foundations." They walked home, hand in hand, past historic homes lit warmly from within, past tourists taking photos of Charleston's beauty, past the restaurant where everything had changed with simple sign language and human kindness. Sarah Wells Prescott had been erased, destroyed, and rebuilt. She'd lost everything and gained something better. A life of integrity, love earned through fire, justice that tasted sweet because it was deserved. And every day she chose to be visible, to help others survive their erasures, to prove that small acts of kindness could indeed change everything. That truth eventually triumphed, that love, real love, was worth every risk. The end. Have you ever felt invisible? Like your contributions didn't matter, your voice went unheard, your worth was measured only by what you could do for others? Sarah's story reminds us that being seen, truly seen, is one of our deepest human needs. For those of us who've spent decades building careers, raising families, or serving others, there comes a moment when we wonder, did any of it matter? Will anyone remember? Sarah learned that one simple act of kindness, signing with a lonely deaf woman in a restaurant, could change everything. Not because it was grand or expensive, but because it was genuine. Her story asks us, when did we last feel truly seen by another person? When did we last make someone else feel that way? The beautiful truth is that it's never too late for second chances, for love that honors who we really are, for justice that comes slowly but surely, for building something meaningful from broken pieces. We don't diminish with age, we clarify. We become more ourselves, more honest about what matters. What moment in your life made you feel truly seen by someone? And who in your life needs to feel seen by you today? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear.